So it's a superior example of a mid-18th century house. But if I were to talk historically about houses, and pick the earlier period, at the end of the 17th century or the beginning of the 18th century, houses were built a little smaller and less grand than Judson House, but they were pretty much in the same style. In New England, the Colonial House had a massive center chimney, usually down the basement. It would measure 10, 12 feet square, and that massive center chimney would have a large fireplace in one room that was called the keep or the hall, and eventually became the kitchen. And that massive fireplace would almost always have a beehive oven in it. Do you know what a beehive oven is?
Not exactly. Would it be one that would be in the wall?
Like, yeah, I'll show you.
Oh, you have one?
Yeah. Vivienne goes back when we're talking about old houses. This is Mrs. Knapp. This is Vivienne.
Well, this is old rock.
But here's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Wonderful.
That brick oven, you never actually had a flame in there. What you do is put the coals in, heat up the bricks, and you shovel them out, and then put the bread or whatever you're baking in there.
I guess this is functional. You could use this at one.
Yes, you could, as a matter of fact. And initially, in the oldest houses, they were at the back of the fireplace. In later houses, they brought them out to here. This is the only one I've ever seen that's kind of in an intermediate position.
Yeah. This is and this was I guess, if this is an example of the fireplace, which is very important to the family at that time. This I guess was the center of activities.
It sure as hell was. Yeah, they lived around it.
Yeah.
Anyhow, at the beginning of the 1700s, there are two houses in town that represent that period. In all likelihood, both of those houses were built like English, I wouldn't say manorial houses, but the houses of the English yeoman or farmer of the same period. They built what they had at home. They very soon found out they needed to change the materials. At home, they would use thatch, and incidentally, thatch is the stuff that's growing right out here is what they made thatch of. The marsh grasses were turned into thatch. When they got here in New England, they found the thatch rotted, and so very soon they started putting up wood shingles and using those for the material. But the idea, the general shape of the house was the same. It had this big chimney in the center, and downstairs and on the second floor, if it had a second floor, and not all of them did, there'd be one room on each side of the chimney, so it'd be a two-room over two-room house.
Now, what dates are we talking about?
We're talking about, actually these were built as early as 1650, but the earliest ones left in Stratford date probably from about 1690. Now, we aren't even sure of that, and architectural historians will differ on it. But there's one that belongs to the town of Stratford near Baldwin Center. It's called the Perry House. There's another one over on Elm Street that Dick and Joyce Slater live in, and it's called the General Walker House, or the Walker House. I think that both of those houses were changed into salt box houses, but originally had been built as something else, and that's why I think they're early.
What do you know what what was the key variable to date the house? Did you use any kind of a process to come up with a hypothetical date?
Well, yes, it was this general structure.
Oh, just as general.
The pre-salt box general shape, but a small house of the type I'm talking about, is the kind of house that was built from 1650 to probably to 1725. So those houses were built during that period of time. Those particular ones, the earliest record we have of somebody saying they had a house on the Perry House property was 1690. I assume it was that house. Other people say no, it was completely rebuilt, and that house actually dates from later than that.
What would be the oldest house in Stratford?
It's one of those two.
Either the Perry House or the...
Or the one the Slaters live in, the Walker House.
The Walker House. Now, the one we were discussing in the beginning was the Judson House, how's that pronounced?
Yeah. That came later.
J-U-D-S-O-N.
Judson.
Okay.
That came later because once people when they wanted to expand their houses or make them bigger, they added this shed onto the back. It's kind of a lean-to on the back. And both of the two that I'm talking about had that lean-to added. But then, later on, they started building houses with that lean-to. This house doesn't look like it, but this was built as one of those salt boxes in, I figure, about the 1730s with that lean-to roof in back. And you could stand on the ground out back and touch the roof. But on the front, it was 2 stories high.
Where do you think the lean-to influence comes from?
Well, there are some stories on it that I'm not sure are true. In the period of Queen Anne, a house was taxed for the number of stories, they say, that it had. And if it looked as though the roof came down to the first story, the taxes would be lower. That's a little bit skeptical, and I've never seen that actually in writing. But you see the same story repeated time and time again in architectural histories, but it's all speculation. No, I think the real reason for the lean-to is more likely climatic. Because in Stratford particularly, a great many of those houses originally faced south. The front faced south. You got more sunlight on this wall, and it heated it up. The back part where the north winds or the storm winds came in, the roof went all the way down and protected you better. And I think that had a lot to do with it. And incidentally, there are or I should say that Slater House does not face south anymore, but it did when it was built, and it was moved in 1934 to a different location, but it originally faced south. Up on Huntington Road, there are a couple of them where the high part, the front part, faces south, and the old lean-to went right down to the ground on the north side.
Talking about Stratford. Stratford is 350-year anniversary next year. Right? So it's about
1639.
So 1639 when it was founded, right?
Yeah. By the way, the story's on the monument over there. If you want to take a look at it sometime when you're going by.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And that's right here on Sherman.
I wrote it, but I think it's accurate in spite of that. When was it? 1970 we put in, about 18 years ago.
Really?
The first one in the state.
Wow. Interesting.
So, yes, 1639, the town was founded. It was founded right here. You hear people talk about Max Harbor, where the town started. This area here that is now marsh was open harbor, and it is what they call Stratford Harbor, and the houses were all around it right here.
And this is called Stratford Harbor now?
It's called Max Harbor now.
Max Harbor.
It was later on named for a little... they say he was black, but I think he was more likely mostly Indian. And he came along around about 1800 or so, and he harvested oyster shells, brought them up here, and sold them, and they made them into wall plaster.
It's full of Max, gentleman. Mac. Less, or Mac is...
M-A-C or M-A-C-K. He couldn't... It's spelled either way because he couldn't spell.
I see.
So Mac.
But, so those are the two most important, or the two oldest. And of course there's a little controversy surrounding which makes it interesting. What are some of the names of the other homes that...
Okay, well let's talk about the Judson House, because the third period was the late 1700s, just before the Revolution. They were building two-story colonial houses, larger now with more rooms. They had kind of the same layout as those salt boxes, but instead of having just a little garret or closet at the rear of the second floor, they had a full-scale room in there. And that's what Judson House looks like. And they fancied them up. Judson House has a neat front door with nice carvings on it. And the colonial cabinet makers, or I guess you'd call them cabinet makers. The man who built the house he wasn't called a carpenter usually, he was called a joiner. Mm-hmm. And the reason is the kind of frames they used, you pegged them together like an erector set, and then put the clapboards on and stuff. So you joined the house. But some of the people who worked on these things, like the guy who worked on Judson House, were better than joiners. They were really cabinet makers. They were artisans. They could do a beautiful job of making fancy-looking moldings and panels and such.
They took a lot of pride in their work and their community.
They did, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can often tell who did a job in those times because each one of them had a little plane that was he had made to his own shape. Mm-hmm. And by looking at the edges of this panel, you can tell whose plane did it.
In those days, did people make their own tools? I mean, I imagine they used wooden tools and what have you. Or the only piece of metal on a plane was the blade itself, and they would, to get the shape they wanted on that blade, they'd work and work and work to get that shape, and then they'd craft the rest of it. Now, sometimes guys who could do this well would do it for other guys, but by and large, they'd be making their own. Sure. So after the Revolution, then, new and different types of houses started coming in. Now, the Young Republic, when we were on our way to paradise in the United States. The ancient Greek republics were going to be reborn, and life on Earth was going to be fabulous. And they didn't have to build the houses nearly as heavy because they didn't need to be protected as much from Indians or from the French or the Dutch or people that they worried about. So they could get a little more frilly and build the houses lighter. So there's two periods of construction post-revolutionary, and we'll talk mostly about the one they call Greek Revival, where they wanted the houses to look like Greek temples. We've got quite a few of those in town. One of the most striking of those is up on the corner of Broad Street and Elm Street, and it's right next door to that old Walker House. And it is a house that was that was built by Lieutenant Governor David Plant. David Plant was a politician. He was in the Connecticut Assembly from around 1818 to 1825. He was lieutenant governor for a couple of years. He went into the United States Congress for a couple of years, and when he was going to school in the very early 1800s, one of his buddies was John Calhoun, and Dave Plant and John Calhoun went together to Yale, and then they went to Tappan Reed's Law School up at the other end of the state, first law school in the country actually, for a couple of years together. They were really good friends. Plant went down to visit Calhoun one time some years later, and it was right after that he built his house. And one of his descendants said that she thinks Calhoun influenced, seeing Calhoun's house and houses in his neighborhood influenced the construction of David Plant's Calhoun's house is another area where there are historic homes?
It's, well, Calhoun, of course, is from South Carolina. And some of that frilly southern influence was put into David Plant's house when he built it in 1825.
I see. And in other words, there was a migration of people from the south into this area, but that must have been...
No, more like a migration of ideas.
A migration of ideas?
Yeah.
But
better interchange of ideas.
What was the communication system at that point? Was that, I mean, was horse and buggy or so on and so forth?
Yeah, it was a case of people were able to visit each other a little more easily than they had been in the past. Mm-hmm. In the 1700s, there were sailing packets that could take you to Boston or New York. Mm-hmm. But in the 1800s, they were starting to run steamships. You could get from here to New York, from Stratford to New York by steamship, starting in 1824. Mm-hmm. And the railroads didn't come in until about 1840, 1850. So if Plant was going to go visit Calhoun, in all likelihood, he'd take a packet part way, one of these packet vessels, either sailing ship or steam and sail and so on. But if it were inland, he'd go on the stage line. The stagecoaches were pretty rough on your fanny, actually, but it's the way people travel, and it's a heck of a lot better than it had been a century earlier when you went horseback over roadless wastes. So that's how they would travel. It would be by stage, or more likely by one or another kind of vessel.
I see. Upon the, let's say, Stratford was named and discovered at one point in time. Did it have anything to do with the simultaneous discovery of Long Island, or was that going on about the same time, or actually it's older? How does that work?
Okay. Actually, all of the founding of Connecticut, of course, it's a religious thing. It has to do with in England, the people who wanted to go back to, we'll call it the old-time religion, the Puritans, who felt that Henry VIII's church was becoming fancy like the Roman church, and they didn't want any of that. Even a cross up in the church they felt was idolatry, and they wanted to keep it very simple and fundamental. Well, the king and his Archbishop of Canterbury and the Bishop of London didn't see it that way. So that's why these people came to New England and founded New England, so that they could have the kind of religion they wanted. Of course, the second group that came along had to do what the first group wanted done. Mm-hmm. They wanted freedom of religion for themselves, but not for everybody. In any case, Thomas Hooker and others didn't exactly like what was happening in Massachusetts, so they walked over to Connecticut, set up 3 towns there, Hartford and Windsor and Wethersfield. And they founded a colony. They used the Indian name for the colony, and the name meant Long River in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but Stratford's name, in other words, the name of Stratford comes from?
We honestly don't know where the name comes from. But those were the people who only 4 years after they founded that colony, some of them came down here, and this looked like even better land than they had found up there. On this great sea with all sorts of fish, and there was shellfish out here. The oysters were a foot in diameter, and they were very much afraid that people from New Haven or the Dutch would take this land if they didn't. That's why they settled here. We really don't know how it became Stratford, but I'm sure that it was named after a Stratford that someone came from, a Stratford in England, and I honestly don't know. Everybody says Stratford-upon-Avon. Well, that's the easy way out. The fact is, a lot of these people came from Essex and Suffolk and eastern England, and there's a Stratford there. And some of them took ship in London, and there was a little Stratford in the corner of London.
Yes, well, I mean, I know that many of the towns here in England, New England is, named after towns in England.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And it was named after one town in England, but I'm not all that sure that it was Stratford-upon-Avon.
Right. And I guess maybe we have to assume that.
That's what we...
It's a better
assumption.
What we
do assume.
Is the terrain or anything, are there any similarities that have been historically put together between them, like geographical environment or, any particular similarities, and maybe the names of homes or houses or anything like that might indicate that there was some relationship between Stratford-upon-Avon?
Not really. Stratford-upon-Avon doesn't have much in common with Stratford here. Later on, when, according to John Houseman, when Lawrence Langner built the theater here, Langner tried to persuade everybody that Housatonic was the Indian word for Avon, but he was never able to back that up. Besides, I think that was just Houseman sniping at Langner. Housatonic is the Indian word for Avon. But no, you can't. I can't really see any similarities.
So what were the 3, in other words, we covered 3 of the historic homes. Do you think we can cover at least maybe 10?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would be another group of homes? Maybe you can just name a few, and then we can write in them in a similar context.
Yeah, we talked the earliest period. I didn't give you an example of the salt box, but there are some. We talked about the Judson House. And that brings us up to the Revolutionary period. The plant house as a Greek revival house is one of the earliest of the types of houses built after the American Republic. To my mind, the next important period is the period when people were building, well, we'll call it Carpenter Gothic houses or Steamboat Gothic. These houses were decorated like antique Gothic churches, but they were made of wood. And it was a period that when it went out of fashion, it really went out of fashion. So there aren't many left.
You're speaking about different periods of development of Stratford.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give me perhaps a range of dates that might even make up a range of dates where I can put maybe into different categories?
Yeah.
You know.
The Greek revivals from 1810 to 1830 or 1840.
1810 to
1840.
1840 Greek revival.
That's where you'd see the Greek revival house. And then they started picking. Obviously, this kind of thing overlapped a lot.
But what about the development of it? I mean, we're starting here from 1810, but actually it was founded in 1639. You said, right?
Are you talking about the periods for each of the kind of housing that we talked about?
I see. This is the periods for each of the kind of housing.
Yeah.
Can we?
I thought that's what you were asking.
Yes. Well, in a way, I was, but I guess that would be within the context of the general period of history.
Yeah.
What would be? Can you? From the beginnings until now, are there any periods? What would that be?
Yeah, I have, as a matter of fact, I've divided the books, like The Ages of Man, I've divided the book into 7 parts.
Oh, I see.
And the first 50 years, 1639 to around 1690, or a little before 1700, really, that's the period that I consider the town being nothing but a plantation. It really was in the wilderness. Around about 1700, it became almost like an English town, a true colonial town. In that period, in the book, I am calling the In a Colony of the King. And that ran until 1775, when there was the abrupt change. But these...
that goes 1700 to about where? To about how far? To 1810, and then
no, the 1700 period to say to 1775, 3/4 of the way through the century. These towns were, in many respects, just like English towns, and they thought of it as being a permanent thing. You know, we think of it as being the colonial period. They thought of it as it was going to go on for all time. It wasn't until the 1760s or maybe even the early 1770s when they realized something precipitous was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Now we have, so after 1775, what would be after that? Because we go right into 1810, which would be the Greek Revival influence in terms of the architecture. Yeah. What brought about the change from going from an English town to the Greek Revival structure?
Okay.
What happened here? So it goes 1775 to 1810 to 1840. 1775 to 1810 might be a developmental period?
Well, as a matter of fact, there's another architectural period in there that I didn't mention because there aren't any important federal houses left in Stratford, but architecturally you'd call that period the Federal Period.
Federal Period, 1775 to 1810.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, there is, and I should have mentioned this. There's an outstanding example of a federal house over on Main Street and West Broad Street. It's the house that Jack Daly has just refurbished, and there's a bunch of medical men have offices in it now. It's right across from the Catholic Church, and it's a brilliant Federal Period house.
What is the name of that?
Well, it says William Samuel Johnson on it, but it was Samuel William Johnson. This was Willie Sam's son. But when they put a sign on it some years back, they noticed the American Revolution got caught up in this thing and they made a mistake. The house was built in 1799, and it was the son of the signer of the Constitution that built it, lived in it.
It was the son of the signer of the Constitution?
Yeah.
Samuel Johnson, right?
William Samuel Johnson was the signer, and Samuel William was the guy who built the house.
Oh, Samuel William.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the Johnsons and their descendants lived in it until about 1910, actually. They lived in it for over 100 years.
Well, that's son of the signer of the Constitution.
Yeah.
I know it's on here, but I'm doing this here so I can ask you a question. Okay, so what we have now is... that's interesting.
And that was when the country was brand new, and the architecture reflected it. They went to a very symmetrical architecture, a classic architecture. And that's the way they thought things were going to be in
In other words, they thought of
country.
society as being very permanent in those days rather than...
Yeah.
Now we're
Yeah.
used to change.
And the millennium was at hand, and it didn't happen that way. But they thought perfection was on its way, and that's why these neat symmetrical houses, they are architecturally very nice, I think.
Interestingly enough, we have here the English town. Of course, we have 1776, so during that time, we have these constitution signed, so we were going through somewhat of a change. The whole country was going through some vast changes at this point.
Yeah.
And then, interestingly enough, soon after the Constitution was signed, immediately you go into the Federal Period, which you call the Federal Period. What could we say that might be a governmental period or more government influence in the town or so on and so forth? Was there more control? Just for discussion.
No, as a matter of fact, there was less. As far as government was concerned, the town, I think, was more self-sustaining after the break with England. The town was more on its own for a while. Of course, in the state of Connecticut, the towns never were totally alone. The state government calls the shots, and the town does what the state says it can do. It's a small state and tightly knit. That's quite different from some of the larger and newer states.
I see. So the Greek Revival home. Are there any other? Okay, the Federal House is the only William Samuel Johnson House is the only monument to the Federal Period, or are there some others? Well, that's the typical.
It's the only one I can think of offhand.
That's
and it
great.
is a classic house. It's
good. If you go and see one, you can get an idea what the Pharaoh Period is.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we go into the Greek Revival House, of which then we've already discussed many of the homes.
Yeah, and David Plant's house is an excellent example of that. There are others around town. Usually some of the Greek Revivals had two-story columns out front, going right up to a pediment. And
the column influence comes from maybe from South. Some of the ideas from Washington.
No, they come from Greece.
From Greece.
Yeah, it's this Greek Revival thing. It went through Europe a little before the United States, so you might say it comes from Greece by way of France and England. You go over to England and you see in the early 1800s a lot of banks and government buildings made that.
Have you put together any kind of video? Has anybody put together any kind of video on anything to do with Stratford? Perhaps maybe you would make a video where you could walk around and you go to different places and you speak and you can see on video. That's nice.
No, I run slideshows every now and then when people want to. I got to do one for the school kids up at Worcester.
Well, this way, the interpretation is correct.
But we do have the school system is going to make a historical video. It won't have much in the way of architecture in it, but it's going to be the town's history, a 40-minute video of the town's history, and they're getting ready to start that now, and that'll be ready for September next year. I think to do it right, be ready a year from now, so we will have a video of the town's history.
Okay, now we've gotten to the point where I think we had talked about the Judson House now, and then we did mention another.
Yeah, Judson House being the last of the pre-revolutionary types of architecture.
Oh, last of the
pre-revolutionary.
Pre-revolutionary. Okay, and that's the. Now, why the Greek Revival home period? What is this Greek Revival period? Is this where a number of Greeks migrated to the area, or
no?
Why is it called the Greek Revival? You mean Greek Revival in architecture?
It's because people were using this kind of classic architecture.
But in the meantime, what kinds of individuals were comprising, were moving in? The population must have been growing, reproducing somewhat on its own, and then you had migrations coming from different places?
There wasn't much in the way of migration, actually, in the periods that I've mentioned to date. Certainly up until 1830, there wasn't much in the way of migration. The people were either British, mostly British stock, And they had slaves. There were, what was it, about 8% of the population was slaves. That's a large percentage, actually. And there were more slaves along the coast than there were inland, because the merchants were the ones who could afford slaves. There were some of the people had been immigrants from France. The French Protestant Huguenots were driven out of France by the French Catholics and settled here. And there were a few Dutchmen, but it was mostly Northwest European stock that was settling here. They had driven the Indians inland, and they had a few blacks with them, as I say. The slave's life is never a great thing, but it was quite different from the southern slave life. They were treated as well as the bondsmen. Bondsmen were people, British people who, if they wanted to come over here and didn't have the money to get here, they'd sign they'd sign themselves away for a period of time. And so they too would have masters and would not really be free until a period of time was up. Of course, with the black slave, that went on for his whole life, except that there were cases where black slaves were permitted to buy their own freedom. They could save up their money and pay whatever they were assessed at. They were assessed like property, like horses and cattle. And if a slave was worth 120 pounds, there were often times where if he could save up that 120 pounds, he could buy his freedom from his master. Peculiar. Different from anything that we think of, really. It wasn't the Southern Uncle Tom's Cabin type slavery. Yet at the same time, ministers, important lawyers, important citizens thought this was perfectly okay. They got pissed, of course, when they couldn't be free, when the king was laying down the law to them. But they didn't think this applied to their blacks. They just an entirely different way of thinking about things. These were good people. These weren't mean people, but they just couldn't think of things the same way as you do now. So the population, the population that made things happen, anyhow, were probably by this time 5th and 6th generation people whose ancestors had been the colonists. They were the ones who kept things going.
Now, what home would you find would be significant? We're going from 1840 to the next historical period.
Yeah.
Which one house would be important for that period? Representative. And so we're going from 1840 to what? What would you say? Make it up if it...
The next period, as far as architecture is concerned, is the period we call the Victorian period, and that lasted all the way really to 1880 or 1890.
So 1840 to 1890?
Yeah. Victoria lived a long time, so the period was 60 years long.
But how did this influence come about? I mean, we have the Greek Revival, now we have the Victorian. Where's the communication come from? Influence. I mean, we know that it's transmitted, but
what happened starting at about the Civil War is that there was probably more divergence of wealth in town. The poorer people didn't get any poorer, but the richer people got a lot richer. And they were able to embellish their homes, to build bigger, fancier homes.
Well, capitalism now is beginning to develop.
Yeah, that's it. And, there is a little tiny workman's house called Victorian Vernacular, and it's a very simple little house and very cheap. There's some of them over on Stratford Avenue near the town dock there. But the Victorian house, by and large, was a house that belonged to the hotel owner or the merchant or the shipping owner or the guy who had a hell of a lot of money. And within Victorian, there's a form of architecture called the Italianate. And it's a classic design that started out in the Piedmont in northern Italy. And there's a fabulous example of that in Stratford. It's right across West Broad Street Green from the Perry House. It is a house that was built by Frederick Benjamin in 1854. I don't know how many rooms it has. I think it has 20 rooms. But it's 3 stories high, flat roof, built with red stone and stucco, and it had a huge porch out front, stone columns. It's still there. It's used as a rooming house now because nobody can afford to live in it alone anymore.
Now, at this time, during this Victorian period, if the development of capitalism was, well, if generally the country was getting to trade more, there must have been, now at this point, there must have been more of an influence in shipping.
Absolutely.
And so, there, at what point was it during this period where Stratford was Stratford ever, first of all, a seaport, or was there?
Okay, those good questions. Earlier on in colonial time, there were a lot of vessels sailing out of Stratford, going down to the West Indies, and even going over to Europe. They weren't very big. I doubt if any of it was 100 feet in length. In the colonial period, there were a lot of sea captains from Stratford. But what happened is they got into the 1800s. The ships got larger and larger. This kind of thing, and even Bridgeport was no longer a place you could take a ship from, a 200-ton ship or a 400-ton ship, and go to Europe or China. So they started, the ship's captains then, or shipping companies, really, for the foreign trade, they were all operating out of New York. But interestingly enough, a great many of their sea captains lived here in Stratford.
Really?
They might be away for a year or two, but when they came home, they'd come the 60 miles up to Stratford, and this is where they had their families and their homes.
And in other words, right in this particular area?
Absolutely.
Right here.
Absolutely.
And of course it was close, they were close to the ocean. But on the other hand, where was the development, where would you say, just a question, where would the center of town be at this time? In other words, where would the governmental district would be up the street, up there, that where it originally stands, town hall?
In the south of the town hall, in the spot we call Stratford Center. It's where the old Stratford Theater is.
That would be
and where Lovell's is. Yeah, that was the center. The town hall was always within a stone's throw of that. Some of the churches were, and of course one of the churches is still there. All the little businesses were in that area. When they finally put up a firehouse, where the firehouse was there, and so on.
And where do you think the wealthiest communities lived at that time? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, well, they were scattered all around. Most of them were right down here on Elm Street.
They were, in other words, they were right on the water, or
close enough to the
close
water.
Enough to the water. Historically, that's a little odd.
The Gorhams lived in this house for about 2-3 generations. Now, this was earlier. From 1750 to about 1840, the Gorhams lived here.
Your home?
Yeah. And Captain Gorham, he had a 100-ton vessel, and he kept it right across the street here. Now, that would draw 8 feet, and he was able to keep that, to winter, that vessel right over there.
So, in other words, your house would be considered built during the Victorian period?
No, this house was changed a hell of a lot. People who lived in it were always able to spend the money to change it, and the result is they corrupted it. Really, it's not a good example of any kind of architecture.
Well, but on the other hand, the basic house, as far as you know, was built during.
It was built in the 1730s as a salt box.
Was built in the 1730s.
Yeah, and right now, if you stand away, it looks like one of these Italianates.
So it's actually part of the English town period, you want to call it?
Yeah.
Or, maybe we can just...
Yeah, that's what it was built.
English town period. So this is what might be an English type of...
Yeah.
Okay.
But as I say, it ended up having an 1846 facade put on it.
Okay, now the sea captains. What were some of the other famous sea captains that lived?
Well, the one we think of, the one we know most about is Captain John Sterling. Because it was his daughter who gave Sterling House to the town, the community center. And today, people don't really know much about the rest of these sea captains, but Captain Pulaski Benjamin made record-breaking runs to China with his clipper ships in the 1840s. He beat records. His name was Pulaski.
1840s, the clipper
Pulaski
period.
Benjamin, yeah. Just the beginning of it, really.
And then, of course, as you said, steam
was also emerging, but steam didn't come about until
Yeah,
right around after the clipper ships. Right?
For oceanic trips, sail lasted well beyond the Civil War. But for coastwise trips, the steamboats really took the trade away from the little schooners and sloops and stuff that had been doing the sailing.
Were boats ever used as transportation up the up the coast here? Did they use it? The town ever use that? Oh, they did.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
As a form of transportation. Otherwise, they would build the road here. What would be the main road? Is there a strip through Stratford that was a?
It's changed from time to time, but it is the road that it started out as an Indian path. Then they called it the King's Highway, and then after Ben Franklin was postmaster in 1757, they started calling it the Post Road, and they still call
Franklin was postmaster.
Yeah, you didn't know that?
I don't know.
He was colonial postmaster for the northern half of the colonies, and that's the year he actually came through Stratford and he put up all these milestones. And he did that because people were the post office charged by the mile. Yet there was a lot of arguments how many miles something was from something else. So he had a device, an odometer really, put on his carriage, and every mile he stopped and drove the peg in, and men stayed there and put a stone in. There's two of those stones in Stratford now. One of them's up the hill on West Broad Street. That was the Post Road until later on the Post Road became Stratford Avenue and then Barnum Avenue and such, but that's where it was until about 1900. And then there's another one over near the new laundry over on Ferry Boulevard.
Ben Franklin's home? Nobody knows where he lived.
Well, he lived in Philadelphia.
Oh, but while he was postmaster, he wasn't here as postmaster.
No, he had everything from Philadelphia up to Maine. And then there was another guy that was running south from Philadelphia down into the Carolinas.
Yeah.
So he did come through here occasionally.
I did that. I read
pretty conscientious man, do the job.
Oh, yeah, he was interesting. I liked it.
So the main highway was the Boston Post Road, and in some parts of this area you'll see it called that. It's here in Stratford we call a piece of it Boston Avenue. Over in Fairfield you'll still see it labeled the Post Road. If you go east you'll see places where it's called the Post Road. Oh, and Fairfield is another part still called the King's Highway.
I see. So you have Indian Path, King's Highway, and then it goes into
Post Road.
Post Road, and that's what it is today, right?
Yeah. Then it became US 1.
Now it's US 1. And the exact path, the exact route
Well,
is US 1?
no, they changed them every now and then.
Oh, so the original road is not known?
No, I can show you where it was in
on an
each
historical
period of
map.
time.
And I would bet that there are probably homes in the area.
Oh, yeah.
The original.
Oh, yeah.
Along the original
Yep,
path.
absolutely right.
It's interesting that was covered up. It's interesting that street, that road was covered up. Why? Was it awkward for the town, or what historically or structurally happened in the town that decided to take the main road? If that was used as the main road of going in and out of town to going out of Stratford, perhaps in other parts of Connecticut, or to the waterfront, then at one point the development of it, I guess, Kings you see, it was important here, Indian Path to name it, then Kings indicate, and then it went into Post Road. Okay, now why Post Road, Post Office, whatever, and then went into US 1, still US 1, which is an important road, was held in importance. Why main migration route? I don't know, that's a question. That's one of my questions. Now we go here from, let's see, 1840 to 1890, the Victorian period, and that particular home was very nice, and it kind of tied us in with this. Now we go from the Victorian period to 1890 to the next period, right? What's that?
I guess you can stop breaking it down architecturally after that, because there are architectural names for some of the various types of houses.
So,
But it wasn't as clear cut after that.
So in other words, can we say the modern period started in 1890?
Yeah. And one of the most important kind of architecture in the 1890s, massive buildings, railroad stations, courthouses, things like that. They were called Romanesque. And you can usually tell them because they'll have huge brick arches in the facade. And the arch is circular. It's the Roman arch, not the Gothic arch or anything else. And there was an architect named Richardson, the National, who did a hell of a lot of these things. Anyhow, buildings built in the 1880s or 1890s, and then shortly after the turn of the century, often were called Richardson Romanesque because they were designed by this man Richardson. An example of that kind of architecture, Richardson didn't do it, but somebody else did it in his style, is the Sterling House that I mentioned. The son of John Sterling, the sea captain, went to Yale, became a lawyer, left New York, and he became Daniel Drew's lawyer. Do you know who Daniel Drew was? You remember Daniel Drew? Erie Railroad. He was the guy who bought all the stock in the Erie Railroad and swindled Commodore Vanderbilt, and they got judges out against each other.
Yes.
And the rest of the world got poor, and the Erie Railroad went bankrupt several times, but Daniel Drew made a hell of a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sitting on his coattails was this New England lawyer, and he was a very young man when he first started working for Drew. It was in the 1866 or 1867. I'm not sure I have the dates exactly right, maybe 1872. But in this period of time when he was manipulating the Erie stock, in the back office he had this young lawyer working for him. Now this guy is a congregational, church-going man who thinks it's unethical to work on Sundays and all this kind of thing. And he's helping this character. John Sterling was just an excellent technician. And suddenly Drew's finding these suggestions written up as to what he should do next by this different hand. And it's not the guy who's running his lawyer's business. It's this clerk in the back office, and he finds out who he is. And pretty soon, Sterling, he recognizes Sterling as being better than Sterling's bosses. And Sterling eventually left the company, Field and Company, I think was his name, that he was with, and started his own law office. And before he knew it, all of the big businessmen in New York City were coming to him for business. So he knew what was going on, and he knew where to invest his money. He became one of the first of the corporate lawyers. So in the 1890s, he never got married. He was interested in his business. But in the 1890s, he built for his mother and his two sisters this house in Stratford we call it Sterling House. And that's the house that later one of his sisters gave her to town. John and the town never really got along with each other. He lived in New York most of the time, and he just came up here to visit, actually. And when he died, it turned out that he was a multimillionaire, and a buck was worth an awful lot more then than it is now. But when he died in 1918, he didn't leave the money for the town. He left it to his university. His university was Yale University. Now, you may have been in the Sterling Library up at Yale University, but he left them enough money, not only for the library, but for the chemistry lab, for the graduate school, for the law school. There's another building called the Sterling Tower. And when they finally put John Sterling's money to work, 10, 12 years after he died, they kept it for a while, but when they finally put it to work and built all these buildings, Yale University was worth twice what it was worth before John Sterling died.
Right.
He actually doubled the real estate of that university.
Fantastic.
So
Now-
he's the guy that's responsible for that lovely house that we use as our community center, although he never would have given it to Stratford himself. It's just fortunate that his sister outlived him and the town got it.
In 1890, the modern period, might the modern period be broken down into, let's say, 2 or 3 periods as well? Because, I mean, 1890 is significant. I mean, it's,
I'm sure you can, yeah.
Is there any particular house that, let's say, if we go, let's say 1900 is nice. Is there a 1900 and maybe a 1930? And then, of course, it's easy for 1950, right? Everybody can relate to 1950, but if we go 1900, 1890, 1900, 1930, is there any particular historical homes that you feel a good representation of a range of, in that area?
Yeah, there are quite a few very impressive 1900s period houses still around. There were a couple different architecture being used, of course, at the same time, and the houses might look quite different. But there is and this, I'm going to throw another architectural style at you, the Queen Anne Revival style. Let's say the family who lives on Elm Street and Judson Place, southwest corner, Grandchamps. Ray Grandchamp is the administrative executive for St. Vincent's Hospital over in Bridgeport. But the Grandchamps live in this late 1890s or just about 1900 Queen Anne Revival house. And they have just repainted it the way it was originally. And it has all sorts of columns in it. It has several different types of shingles and so on. And they've painted the house in 4 colors, and it looks absolutely beautiful. It's really neat. So, yeah, that's...
Do you happen to know I'll go over and drive over. Do you happen to know the 4 colors then?
I can't remember. It's red and tan and brown, and it's in that... There's no garish blues or greens in it, as I remember. But it's beautifully put together. Yet right across the street from that is Judson's, or is a house that was built by Edmund Judson. Edmund Judson was the president of the Bridgeport City Trust Company, and it's just a plain shingle house. And that's what they were called. The houses were called shingle style. It was very popular from about 1880 to 1910. Many big cottages were made shingle style.
I guess they were really impressed with shingles in those days, right?
Yeah, but here's 2 houses about the same period, and they look absolutely vastly different from each other.
Houses prior to this didn't have shingles, right? They just had regular roofs?
Well, no, they had shingles, but they
weren't stylish.
Yeah, the shingle style, you really notice the shingles, because it seems as though it's all shingles.
So people, in 1900, the modern period, people are becoming more concerned, they're becoming more wealthy, and they're becoming very concerned about how they look and how they look to their neighbors and so on and so forth. So they're becoming class conscious at this time, 1900.
On that same corner, on the northeast corner of that same street, is a very good 1920s period house. It belonged to the Begg family for a long time, and we would call that California style.
California style.
Yeah.
What year was that?
About 1920. And again, California style really ran up through 1930 or so. And it has a pair of massive columns on a small porch. These columns you can just about put your arms around on a small porch out front. The house is very simple. Clapboards, probably 7 or 8 inches between clapboards. The roof is 4-sided and almost flat. It's quite different.
Then we go into the 1950s. We've covered we've covered, I think, a significant number of homes. However, are there any homes, that stand out in your mind that you might be able to, or you would like to, at least represent in any of these stages? You can just something that you feel is important in terms of that. And then my second question would be, what did you think we were going to talk about? I think that's very important for me to know too.
Oh, you mentioned the history book. I thought we were going to
we'll during that
chat through the outline of what's in the book or something.
We're getting to that too. No, okay.
You going to do that today too?
Well, is it a bit much for you?
Well, sounds to me as though you've got
Well, I've got to
enough
to go through all this, and I've got to try to develop something that's readable for the public. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah. So this is going to take you.
Oh yeah.
I think
10
you got.
hours
I think
is
you got a
fine.
full plate here already.
10 hours or something.
Do the other thing another time, probably.
Well, no, but of course I have to mention your book. I mean, you're the author. I mean, all of that is going to be. We're getting into that.
All right.
Okay. Okay. Now in your book, let's talk about your book.
All right.
This is your second book, third book.
Nope. It's the first book I've written as a book. I haven't done any of this, or I haven't published before. My writing background has been rather diverse, or I should say rather different from this type of writing background. Once again, in my business, the writing that I have had to do has been proposal preparation, how to persuade the federal government that you have the best possible helicopter for their needs. And
Yes, well, you're a helicopter designer, and you work at Sikorsky Airport.
that's right. And
Sikorsky
for aircraft.
Aircraft. Yeah.
For every competition that you win, you probably lose 10.
Now, how many years did you spend?
40, 45.
45 years
Yeah.
at Sikorsky. And you recently retired?
Yeah, retired 3 years ago. Yep.
And
But,
how long did it take you to write your book?
Well, it isn't done yet. I've been working on it for a year, and there'll be another 4 months before we're...
Approximately 4 months, but
Yeah.
basically the book is written,
Yeah.
kind of revising it.
Actually, I'm doing it together. I've asked other people to help me. I've got about 14 other authors doing little bits and pieces, but I still ended up doing 3/4 of it myself. And the preparation period, of course, is your whole life. It's everything you've learned about local history. The first draft writing was about a 7-month period, and I'm going through a 3-month revise it, polish it up, edit it period of my own, and then there'll be another 2 or 3 months where I'm working with the publisher and other people to put it in final form.
So this is your pride and joy at this point.
Well, I wouldn't say pride and joy. I think it's the millstone around my neck. That's what it is at this point. I'll show you the way we're going at it. By the way, when it's finished, it's going to look something like
Oh, this is beautiful.
this. It'll be about 50%
Figure.
wider than that, or fatter than that.
I'm sure you're.
But that's one that the same publisher has put out on Greenwich, so it'll be generally that style.
You feel that? I mean, you had the. I'm sure you had the support of your wife. I'm sure she's very proud of your work and so on.
Well,
and
it gets a
so forth.
little trying on her, I guess, now and then. I get up every morning at 5:30, closet myself on the 4th floor. She doesn't see me except for meals. You know, that's no fun. So she's been pretty understanding.
What times of the day do you like the best? Mornings, evenings?
Oh yeah, you can accomplish the most in the morning. Actually. Yeah. I use my afternoons for touching bases with people on this book writing. In the afternoons I may go out and do what you're doing here, interviewing people to find things out, or going down to the library and doing a little research, or going over to the police department and shaking some pictures loose from them and things of that sort. But the morning is the time when my guys most creative. This is the 7th of it here. This is what I said it was in 7 parts. This is what part 3 looks like.
I like to look at the original manuscripts. Somehow they seem more authentic to me. You know, it's nice when they come out in the book. But this is where it is, right here. This is where all the energy and the effort is. I see you have a computer.
Yeah.
What kind of computer do you have?
It's a leading edge.
Leading edge?
Yeah.
Good computer.
And the program I'm using is the Multimate program. It's the same that the town's using in all their departments. I find Multimate works pretty well.
Oh, yeah, that's good. It's a good program. I mean, you know, it came. It's one of the first ones, right? I think it was one of the, so you learned word processing.
Yeah, it's an earlier one. It's an early program. I guess WordStar is the one that I first heard of. People said Multimate was better, and I got that. There have been several new and simpler ones. As a matter of fact, when I bought this leading-edge computer, I had it they themselves have a software program called Leading Edge Word Processing Loop, and it's much simpler to use than the program I'm using. You know, almost as good. It's only half as difficult, but 90% as good. So I'm not sure that if I were starting over, I wouldn't use Loop.
Approximately how many pages do you think your book is going to be?
Well, I can tell you exactly. 360.
360 pages. Are you getting anyone to design the cover for you? Are you going to design it or what?
Well, we're going to have a meeting with the publisher next week.
Mm-hmm. You're going to have some input into that?
Yeah.
I see.
I think probably on the dust cover it'll look a lot like the kind of thing we have here, but the picture will be Milton Bond is just Milton Bond's an artist in Housatonic. He paints on glass, and he's done things for various other towns here. And he did one commission for the White House, egg rolling at the egg rolling at Easter, or the Easter egg hunt on the White House lawn. Things like that. So Milton just completed one of these for Stratford, so I suspect that the picture that we have on the front there is going to be Milton's painting on glass. But other people have come through with some magnificent stuff. I've got a young artist that lives down in Lordship, and just 2 hours ago, Chris Blossom is his name, gave me a transparency of a painting that he made. This is right out here on the Housatonic in about the 1850s.
Oh, this is beautiful.
Isn't that lovely?
Oh, I'd love to have a picture.
Yeah.
Can I get it? This is a painting.
That's a painting.
This is an expensive. This is a color.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not cheap. What Chris has given us there, because I know this guy paid $100 for this one. This is a 19th century painting that has just turned up.
Can these be you know, can a photograph be made from this? Is there a negative to this that they can make a large photograph or poster or anything like that from this?
I don't know.
I mean, I know they can make posters, and
yeah,
I think maybe they can. They can make some posters, or they can make some pictures from this. These are beautiful. Look at the colors.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Who's the artist in it?
We don't know.
Unknown artist?
It's just turned up. You know how it
Did
turned
they look
up?
into the frame or something? Maybe he went down in there, or maybe he signed his name in there.
We don't know. Someday somebody will find out who it is. But the only reason we know the thing exists is some guy out in Ohio had it. And 2 years ago, this Stanford Historical Society came out with a history of the town of Stanford. This picture I just showed you was the centerpiece of that history of the town of Stanford, and it was also their dust cover. Well, weren't they upset when we said, hey, that isn't Stanford, that's Stratford? Oh, no, it's impossible. But all four buildings on here are, in that picture are recognizable. One's the Christ Church, one's the Lovejoy Tavern, one is the Academy that stood on top of Academy Hill, and one's the local school.
Have you always enjoyed writing?
Oh yeah. Had some pretty good talent instructing us. We had, when we were doing these proposals, at Sikorsky, the company brought in an expert to work with us, and year after year after year they bring in the same man. It's Dr. Eugene Ehrlich is his name. He was at Columbia, and he's written a hell of a lot of books on just that kind of thing. But he really taught us a lot. And I think when we were finished, he learned more about engineering than we did about writing, because he could pick up engineering errors all over the place. He was fun. But working with Gene, I think, really taught me an awful lot about how to say something simply. The man was good. And as I say,
excuse me, what was your wife's name again?
Vivienne.
And Vivienne, okay, and this gentleman's last name that you just mentioned?
Working with the expert, Eugene Ehrlich?
Eugene
Ehrlich.
Ehrlich. How would you spell Ehrlich?
E-R-L-I-C-H.
E-R-L-I-C-H.
And he was with Columbia. In fact, he's still I don't think he does much teaching. He does mostly writing. He's just written a new one called Amo Amas Amat, wherein he takes all the Latin phrases that we use every day and forget that they're Latin. He's broken all of this down and given us the derivation of this is what you're saying and why. It's fascinating.
Do you enjoy writing? What made you? Do you enjoy writing, or was it an intellectual decision to write the book, or you've always been interested in history? I would imagine.
We needed a local history book, and we have things that purport to be local history books, but they're simply delineations or recording of lists of names and things of that sort, and the real history isn't in there. So I decided it was time to put it down. It was what we have on previous history books is, I say, just a bunch of factual things about who was town manager when and a list of postmasters and things of that sort. The story of how Alfred Ely Beach built the first subway in New York City. Alfred Ely Beach lived next door here. How he built the first subway in New York City is nowhere in history. The story of the Beardsleys doing their counterfeiting in 1752 is nowhere in history. These are the things that we're starting to put down.
And of course, this is really a focal point in terms of your career, because you've spent so many years as an engineer, and now to do this at the end of your life. What do you feel about that? Is there something that you've always wanted to do, or is something that you thought about that,
Oh, there's no question that I felt that somebody needed to do what I'm doing for a long, long time.
Do you write a newspaper, or you go write with the computer? Or you do all different kinds of things, I guess.
I'm doing it all on the keyboard now. Any writing I do on the keyboard. I don't do anything long.
I see. And I would imagine you have a very large collection of historical volumes, or
yeah, I've
specifically for Stratford. Or?
Yes, I've accumulated. Well,
how many books would you say there are on Stratford?
Well, on aspects of Stratford, there are a great many things. We mentioned William Samuel Johnson. There are about 3 biographies on Johnson. One done by a fellow named Beardsley over 100 years ago, and then some recent ones. There's one on his father, also done by Beardsley. There are stories on all aspects of the thing. If you look at Christopher Collier's book, Decision in Philadelphia, where he writes about the summer of the Constitutional Convention, that took place in Philadelphia, and it was nationwide. But our Willie Sam Johnson is in it, and it gives you perspective on things that were happening in Stratford. And if you know what was happening in Stratford, it gives you some perspective on that guy, and how and why he did what he did, and the influence it's had on the rest of us. And when you study the War of 1812 in history, they tell you about the scourge and the rattlesnake, the privateers that disrupted all the British shipping in the North Sea.
Because there is a great influence and a historical structure of buccaneers and privateers. It's an interesting period of history, their development, and they've kind of phased out.
Well, the guy who owned the scourge lived down here in Lordship. Built his house in Lordship.
What did he consider himself, a privateer?
Oh, yeah.
He partially worked for the government and partially was a pirate, huh?
But he was doing all this for his own income. He partially worked for the government because they gave him the ticket. But he did it all to get rich, and he did. He got rich. His name was Nickel. Benjamin Nickel. You read about Benedict Arnold, and you're reading about Stratford. Benedict Arnold was better than people think. It's like somebody...
Is Benedict Arnold your idol?
He's not exactly my idol, but he did a hell of a lot of good before he did the bad things. In the Battle of Lake Champlain, in the Revolution, One of his ship's captains was a Stratford guy, Samuel Hawley, and David Hawley rather. And David Hawley was important to the Revolution, because what Arnold and his crew did, they lost the battle on the lake against the Brits, but they kept the Brits from coming down and dividing the colonies in two. Stratford man did that. Nobody knows it. These are the things we're putting in the book.
That's nice. I think it's going to be fun. Do you think that the style of the book, your style of writing, would be? Do you feel the book is very specialized in the sense that you would have to have a vast history or a significant history background in Stratford to get into it, or you think that
I'm not writing it for scholars.
So you're writing it for the public to enjoy?
And I'm not for people to enjoy. From school kids to
anybody who would be interested in Stratford?
Yeah.
Maybe I would hope that the high school.
And I'm not even going to put any footnotes in it. I do think that I'll probably make up a separate compendium of sources for scholars or something like that.
Sure.
But it isn't going to be in the basic book. People
Well,
don't
you know,
want
I guess
that.
you'd have to give it to the public. Who's going to be publishing the book anyway?
The outfit that did this is called Phoenix Publishing. They're up in New Hampshire, and I've looked. They've done, I think, 52 local histories, so that they've got some experience in that kind of thing. And they're the publisher. When you say the publisher, they're the technical publishers. The Stratford Historical Society really is publishing it, and if enough are sold so that there is any profit, it will go into the publications fund that the Society will keep for some future historical publications. Nobody's making any money on this. I may have to pay a few people to do a bit of the illustrative material.
So you'd say
But aside from from Phoenix Publishing itself, nobody's making a cent.
Interesting.
I'm getting volunteer help right through, and people have been very good.
Excuse me, mentor.
Sure. There is a step down between there and there. It's only about a foot lower down there in the front rooms.
It's beautiful.
And that's one of the indications this place was built as one of those salt boxes. There's some old paneling.
I see.
Vivienne? Yes. Joe wants to take your picture.
I didn't give you any.
Do I look historical?
Yes, you do. You look wonderfully
Why
historical.
don't you come out with your wooden spoon? I
Did
didn't tell you that when I'm writing a history book, she's writing a historical cookbook to go with it.
Yeah, I'm writing the Truce and Quinquagenary cookbook.
Is that right? That's fantastic. Well, we're going to have to have a separate interview for your cookbook, okay?
Yeah, caraway content here.
Oh,
Believe me, old recipe.
oh my
Get the
goodness.
caraway seeds caught in your teeth.
I don't
Candy
believe it.
that was made in 1750.
Yeah. Oh, this batch wasn't made in 1750. Yeah, we're busy collecting old recipes. No, it isn't good for dogs. It's caught in your teeth. You serious about this? You don't look too
Yes.
great either.
Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
look wonderfully.
What?
Oh, this is your office.
Yeah,
Oh, this is nice.
yeah. This is most of the rest of my book up there.
Uh-huh. That's nice. By the way, I'll make a copy of this tape and I'll give it to you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, most of the rest of the material I've been collecting. I use the Historical Society has a pretty good collection of stuff. So I've collected a few of my own in the meantime. And once in a while I go up to Hartford, the Connecticut Historical Society. They've got manuscript stuff that's in more history.
I think you might be able to just
Sure.
This way I can get a little bit of the helicopters in there as well.
Before you do,
Does some take the spider webs off?
I beg your pardon?
Take the spider webs off?
No, I was thinking of
You like to look at that, huh?
taking a book out. I'll take Jack Cochis's book out and look at it or something. Huh?
Smell Jack's book too.
These are black and white, so these are the types of things that would be in,
One of my
for those
co-authors did this. Another one just did this. Shang Wheeler was.
These are friends of yours?
Well, they are now, yeah, because they're contributing to the book. The guys that have done other things on their own.
Was that Panasonic or?
Epson.
Epson. Oh, that's a good company. It's a wonderful. Leading Edge is excellent.
I like it very much. We did have one breakdown of the monitor.
What you do with this thing, you just put a couple of
This is
samples and
20-month
you got it where
warranty.
you want it. Okay, that should work. And then this whole thing is extremely simple.
You can see why it should be very popular with the Girls Club.
It's got about 200 names on this. I just updated the list for the month. This is for newsletters that the Connecticut Poetry Society sends out every month.
Oh my goodness. That's the only way to go, right? The only way to do it.
Isn't that something?
Gosh. It's amazing how much it organizes your life. And,
Yeah. Got Janet back at the machine.
Is this a particular, nice, very nice room? Is this, let's see, what part of the house was, what was this?
This was a bedroom. This was a small bedroom
And a bed.
over here and a very large bathroom and me moved in.
I see.
Originally, when this house was built, the roof came down to here. This whole thing was just a shed.
Uh-huh.
In fact, that's one of the overhung beam members up there. And there was a roof plate running right across to here, which said the roof was this high, this point, and it really came down to this room was only 3 feet high at the time.
Interesting, they have the original doors, those are just wood doors. I mean,
Yeah.
they're wonderful. Actually, they're very warm, I mean, historical anyway, in a historical sense.
I kind of like the place.
You know, it's sensationalism, it really is. I went right, when I went downstairs into your living room, that's your living room, it's a wonderful experience. Oh my
Now, as
goodness.
long as you come this far, you'll get off the other two to the captain's floor.
You got
Oh,
it?
oh, yeah.
You're not in a rush.
No.
We'll take
It's fine doing it
we'll
very
take you
good.
up this way. These are the front parts of the second floor. There's 6 fireplaces in the house.
Wow. Again, well, that's the way they did it in those days. They only used the fireplace for heat. You know. Do they have you used them? And do they
They're
warm?
all workable.
I mean,
It's,
how could they stay warm? And they really had to practically sit on top of it, right?
Well, that's right. That's right. And you're up on the 3rd floor now, and this was put onto the house in the 1840s. And you can see the ceilings are a lot higher here than they were down below. This really was, they tried to turn it into an Italianate house. That's what this part represents. Watch your head coming up here.
I have to talk to your wife about her. Get the name of it in there and just mention it.
Get a good shot of the sound out there.
Oh, that's nice.
In the theater over yonder. They got the outside of the theater pretty much fixed up now. Painted and relooked and things like that. 22 years ago, we could see the airport from here, and then they put the 2 condos in. Shut off a little bit of our view. little house over there that you can't really see behind the trees is where the man I mentioned, Albert Ely Beach, lived. He was Thomas Edison's patent attorney, and he founded Scientific American magazine.
Fascinating.
So, well, people in Stratford did a lot of things.
Yeah, well, I just tried to, you know. This is some beautiful furniture. Is it your choice of furniture? Some of it all antiques, or just sort of?
These two pieces are what was called Larkin furniture. You probably don't know about that, but one of these soap companies, the Larkin Soap Company, you saved the coupons, and then you handed them in for about $3 worth of coupons. You got one of these chairs.
Let me get a picture of you up here.
Do you have pictures of yourself? I guess I don't. I don't have any pictures of us either. I never think to come up there with a camera. I used to come up with the Sunday Times in February Sundays. The nicest thing in the world. You know, the sun warms this place on a Sunday morning. It was very comfortable, but somehow lately I haven't had time to do that.
Interesting. People must not have been very tall in those days, right? Ceilings are higher here.
Yeah, the ceilings are much higher. These built in the 1840s are much higher. This is just all storage space now. We don't use it for anything. Oh, occasionally, if we have a bunch of friends, they may sleep up there. Most of the time, it's not occupied. Did you say you wanted something from Viv, the name of the cookbook? Or?
Yes, I did. Maybe she can talk about it. Can you just give me a brief statement and I can just mention it?
Right. Well, you could say that we are looking for recipes that are Stratford recipes that are over 50 years old, that have been used in this town, and we're going to publish the cookbook next year with little notes of anecdotes of Stratford history and something to do with how the ladies used to cook. So and we'd be delighted. You can put my name and address or my telephone number in if people would send us old recipes. Everybody has an old book
Okay, now
that their
who
mother
should she
had.
send them to? Name, address?
Okay, Vivienne Knapp. It's Vivienne. Sorry about that. 320 Shore Road. And I'm the editor of the 350th cookbook.
The historical side is sponsoring.
Okay, and so they have to be at least 50 years old, right? And they have to be Stratford.
Stratford related.
Of course. Stratford
I don't
related.
want the recipe that somebody won a prize for in Michigan.
And they can be desserts, it can be anything.
Anything, any kind of food.
Any kind of
yeah.
food. Okay. And is there a name of the book, or you have a name?
We
You're just
don't
working
have
on it
one
right
yet.
now?
We're just starting on it. Yeah.
Okay. And they should address it to you, or let's say cookbook.
That'd be great.
Or maybe, I don't know if they should. No, they should. They'll write cookbook and then...
As long as they address
Right.
it to me and it's a recipe on. Oh, and they should give me an attribution. Who used the recipe?
Where it came from.
Right, where it came from.
Okay.
Somebody dropped a recipe in my book last week and said, Viv, let me know if you want more. I don't know who. I'm still running around trying to find out who left that. So I do like to get names.
I'll give you copies, by the way, of all these pictures as well. So you get pictures and everything in. So you have a whole little historical sketch of yourself, right? That's fun.
We're kind of starting to run a cottage industry in history here, I think.
Interesting, the cottage industry.
That's not going to run off the bottom of the label, is it?
No, it's still on.
Well, from the time our town was founded until the Revolution. And it was after King George and the Duke took over. Well, really, it was earlier than that. It was after King James and the Duke of York took over that became part of New York. But we always considered that to be Connecticut. And even after that, that was,
Now they consider Long Island, Connecticut?
oh yeah.
Interesting.
And it was until the 1680s. And then the king turned it over to New York. But people
Yes.
from here and there,
Jogging my memory.
they went back and forth all the time anyhow.
I haven't looked at that
It
stuff.
was the same families. It was the same people living on both sides of the Sound.
Yeah, and they did well. They didn't, in the winter time, they used to, mostly in the winter. Well, actually, you see, Flanders is somewhat on the South Shore. It's unfair to say, but there was, in other words, Flanders is somewhat in Southampton. It's geographically in Southampton, but it's taxes. They pay taxes in Southampton, the school districts in Riverhead, so kind of like Riverhead, Southampton. And what we're talking about here is the development of the north, what they would call there, Northville, the North Shore,
We're
or
really
northern
right across
part.
from Fort Jefferson.
It's all farmland now, all up there, except for a small area. But actually, I haven't looked on the map to draw any direct relationship between which counties and development of any. Although right now I'm tired, I think. So, thank you.